Now it's time for This Day in History.
This day in history.
On this day in history in 1820, King George III died. You will remember King George III from when we whooped his greatest military force in the world during the Revolutionary War and won a country for ourselves. Because of this unhappy connection, Americans sometimes take a glib and dismissive view of George III. His 4,000-pound statue in downtown Manhattan became the first casualty in America's increasing obsession with toppling monuments. The mob did have a good reason in that case, though. After the Declaration of Independence was read for the first time publicly in New York on July 9, 1776, a group of future soldiers stormed downtown to melt the statue for bullets. That's fair enough. That's a decent use. By the outbreak of the war, George III had not even received the Declaration of Independence. On the question of various burdens to pay for the French and Indian War, like the stamp tax, George III was generally more sympathetic than his government to the colonists' concerns. The tax burdens on the colonists were far lower than those imposed on George's subjects in Britain. Indeed, they were the lowest in the Western world, the taxes imposed on the American colonists. George was generally fairly universalist in his charity. One of the complaints, actually, that our founding fathers listed in the Declaration of Independence is that the king had defended the rights of, quote, merciless Indian savages. He was too nice to the Indians. After the Revolutionary War, King George III was very frank about this. You know, this is a guy who had a great character and reputation in Britain. I believe he was shockingly loyal and faithful to his wife. He may have been the only royal ever in history to be faithful to his wife. This was a guy of good classical education, good morality. And after the war, he said, quote, I will be very frank with you. I was the last to consent to the separation, but the separation having been made and having become inevitable, I had always said, as I say now, that I would be the first to meet the friendship of the United States as an independent power. He didn't want to lose the Americas and the United States, but having lost them, he met them as gentlemen and as separate independent powers. When Benjamin West, George's royal court painter and a good old Pennsylvania boy, told King George III that George Washington would step down as leader of the United States after 2 terms, George responded, if he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world. So, while we find ourselves battling the statue topplers who want to tear down and erase our history, all of the great men who built our country, perhaps we should be an example and take an even broader and more charitable view and give even former foes like George III their due. So R.I.P. George III, a good king. We had our differences, we fought a war over it, and now he's a good guy. We should look back on him with some dignity.